G'day everyone, my name is Hoi, and in this video I'm going to show you a really cool effect called the Droste effect. We'll use Photoshop and a separate app or program to create this effect, but don't worry, it won't cost you a thing. As usual, if you want to follow along, the links to the images are in the description. Before we get started, let's talk about what the Droste effect is. Now, you just saw a glimpse of it just before, so you should already have an idea, but let me give you a little bit more background on what it is. The Droste effect is basically an image within itself, and it happens recursively or repeatedly. The image here is a design that was done in 1904 on a container that contains cocoa powder. Now, what cocoa powder is basically the powder that you use to make chocolate and other things. Now here you see a nun holding a serving tray, and on that tray is a cup of hot chocolate here. But if I zoom in a tiny bit more, there's a cheeky image of the nun herself, and it's replicating the bigger image. So that was done in 1904. A more modern example is one of Ryan Gosling and Macaulay Culkin. Now here you see Ryan wearing a shirt of Macaulay, and Macaulay has returned the favor and printed that image here onto his own shirt, and that prompted Ryan to do the same thing, and then you have another retaliation from Macaulay Culkin, resulting in an image of an image of an image onto the t-shirt. So that's a modern day example of the Droste effect. Now in this tutorial I'm going to use two images here. One is of this clock here. We're going to turn this clock to this spirally little clock here, and then this image of this lady holding a picture. We're going to mask her out, and then we're going to put a gradient background, and then we're going to change that picture into this Droste effect. We're going to use a little bit of Photoshop and then a little bit of another program called Photo Spiralysis. Photo Spiralysis is a free app. There is a paid version of Photo Spiralysis, but we're not going to use that version in this tutorial because one of my aims of my tutorials is to show you how to use Photoshop and other programs for free. So that's why for the images that you see that I will use in this tutorial, you can download it for free. The links are in the description, as well as any programs that I use. I try to make it accessible for everyone who wants to learn. Okay, so to access Photo Spiralysis, we have to go to the App Store. If you're on a Windows PC, we have to go to the Windows App Store, and if you're on Apple like me, then we have to go to the Apple App Store. Now, I don't have a Windows PC, well, not one that's good enough to screen record off because it's rather slow. I only use that for basic things like checking emails and basic word processing, but I'll still show you how to do it via screenshots, and then later I'll show you how to download it from the Apple App Store as I'm on a Apple computer. Now here's a screenshot of my Windows PC. If you already know how to download the app from the App Store, you can skip to the next time code in the description below. The version that I'm using of Windows here is Windows 10. So if you're using a different version of Windows and you need more detailed instructions, a quick Google search will point you in the right direction. Now here I've got a icon. That's the Windows App Store icon. If you don't see it on your taskbar, you can simply search for App Store here, and then the App Store should show as one of the options here. When you have that, click on the app here, and then that should bring you into this App Store app here. When you're there, type in Photo Spiralysis and press enter on your keyboard, and some results should come up. These are my results. We're going to ignore everything else. What we're interested is this one here. So when you have that, click on that, and that will show you this particular screen, and then you can press install here. Once you press install, it will actually download and then install it. Once it finishes installing, you can open the app here by pressing this. This is obviously a one-time setup. You don't need to download it every time. So the next time that you want to open the app, you can just type in Photo Spiralysis in your search bar and then just click on that. Now to download it from the Apple App Store, let's press Command Spacebar to bring up Spotlight and type in App Store, press Enter. And then similar to the Windows version, let's type in Photo Spiralysis, press Enter, and this will come up. Now I've already downloaded it before, which is why I've got an icon like this here. Nevertheless, you can click on this and then this should say download or install. I can't remember what it is. I'm going to click on that icon and it's going to download. Now, depending on your settings on your computer, it might ask you for your Apple ID. And if it does, then simply put that in. And once it's finished downloading, we can open it. This is what you should see when you open Photo Spiralysis. There's basically 4 steps here before you can render it. As I mentioned before, this is a free version, which is why you see a huge banner here. There is an option to purchase the deluxe version to get rid of that, and I'll show you how to do it later. But apart from the banner below this program here, there's also going to be a watermark at the bottom of your image just to give credit to Photo Spiralysis. And then when you render it out or when you save the picture, the free version, you can't adjust the image size. It does have the option to save it as small, medium and large, but the deluxe version will give you even more flexibility in terms of image size. So if you're doing this type of effect quite often, then you might want to consider upgrading to the deluxe, which is around about $25 US. But for our purposes, just for fun and games, we're not going to download the deluxe version. Okay, so the first thing that we'll do is have to import an image. Now, this image here is from the free sample set here. So if you click here, collections, these are the sample pictures that you can get started with. But we're not going to use any of that, so I'm going to press back. And we're going to open an existing image. Now, the other option here, which I won't go through in detail, is that you can take a picture from your camera as well. Since we've got a already existing image, let's press on File. I'm going to use this Ocean NG photo. That's basically the image of the clock, and then press Open. The next step is to mask this out. So let's click on this tab here. It's got very basic options here. We can either do a circular mask or a polygonal mask. For this image, we'll use a circular mask. In the next image, we'll use a polygonal mask. So let's click on circular, and you can see that this has come out. You can see that these blue stops here, these are the only handles that we can adjust. So let's click and drag this out. So the name of the game here is to cover this clock so that the image can be replicated around it. One of the limitations, and there are a few, is that you can't zoom in. Well, I haven't figured out how to zoom in, and there's absolutely no documentation on how to use this program. The other limitation is that there is no undo. At least, again, I can't figure out how to undo any of the actions. So if you figured out how to zoom in or undo, please leave a comment in the description. For the time being, let's stretch this out so it covers the clock. Now you can see here that it hasn't covered it, so what I can do is just click and move it up like this as I'm enlarging this mask area. Now, I'll explain what this mask area later, but let me just concentrate on doing this as best as I can. And then once I've got this mask as good as I can invert this here. So what this inversion does is say that this mask area is where I want the picture to be replicated or to be repeated. This image here that is not masked out is the area that I'm going to use to replicate on the masked area. If you made a mistake, the closest thing to undo is to reset these handle positions here. So there you go. Now I've just done that and there is no undo button, so I have to do that again. So let's do that, stretch it out here and then stretch it out something like this. Now the edge blur is basically your feather along the edges here. So I'm just going to leave it as default, and remember to invert that selection. Now here is the powerhouse. The next step is the Droste effect. Let's go through all this. I'm going to go through the main options. I'm not going to go through one by one. So the tiling options, we have clip, extend, repeat, mirror. I'm going to explain this more in detail in the next image, because in the next image you'll see the effect of these a little bit better. For the time being, it doesn't really do anything if I click on these options. So let's leave that for the next image. And for this, let's press shrink. And what that means is that if I click on this magnification, it's going to shrink the smaller layers in front, or magnify it. So you can zoom in and out. If I press grow, it's got a different effect here. So let me just click on shrink, and this is up to you, however much magnification that you want. I'm going to do something around about 1.6, something like this. Now what you find is that you'll probably do in effect a number here, but then afterwards you'll tweak it later when you play around with all the other settings. So it's not a set and forget. We will tweak it a little bit later. Now this offset effect, you can see that it just turns it around. Now if I just scroll down here and click on this button here, you can see that I can move the angle of the image, which actually changes these values here. So you can either punch in a number here, which actually I have no idea what the number should be, so I much rather use this blue dot, click and drag this around to see what effect that will happen here. But if I don't like that, this is the only undo that I can see here. So I'm just going to return it to the center. Mirror odd layers basically flips every other layer. So you can see that this is flipped, this is not, this is flipped, etc, etc. So that's not the effect that I'm after. So I'm going to uncheck that. And as you see now, it's basically copying and pasting each clock on top of each other. But this is where the magic happens, this spiral. I'm going to just go to 1, and then you can see that it's spiraling out from the center here. So let's just exaggerate that. You can see that just by a few clicks, or just by one click and a drag, you can see that the spiral has formed. So I'm going to maybe leave it at 1, and then the stretch is similar to the rotate. Now, the stretch overtakes the rotation offset if you do the spiral. So if I do the spiral now, if I do the rotation offset, it doesn't have any effect because this spiral option, I've got it at 1. So what stretch does is basically spins it around like so. So let's go down to multipoles. And what the multipoles does is basically, if you can picture yourself inside a ball and you're panning around, so it's not just swiveling side by side, but there is a curvature as I'm swiveling from side to side. So I don't want the pole rotation, so I'm just going to change that to 0. And pole longitude simply is like scaling, or not scaling, going up and down. I'm going to reset that to 0, and then latitude is side by side. Now the reason why it's happening just side by side and up and down is because my pole rotation is set at 0. But if I change the pole rotation to a figure not equal to 0, and then I do that, you can see that it's going up and down, but the anchor point is not at the center, it's at the side. So that's what that does, and then latitude does that. I don't want any of that, so I'm just going to press 0, 0, and then 0. Now again, it would have been great if it had some reset buttons, but we're not going to complain too much. Now the tire poles does some funky effects. So you can see that it sort of stretches or distorts the images top to bottom, and then the hyper Droste stretches it from right and left. Position X is basically side to side, and this is pure side to side, whereas this is side to side, but it does some funky stuff if you do the pole rotation. Now position Y is up and down. I'm going to reset that to 0, and then the scale is basically how big or how many versions of it you want. So it could go on forever, so I'll just leave it at 2.03, and then the rotation is rotating the whole image. Now remember, the stretch is rotating the individual layers. So if you watch this, it's turning the individual layers, whereas rotation is turning the whole image here. You can see that there's a bunch of dials and switches, or sliders I should say. You can stay here all day to finesse that, but this looks good to me. So the last step is that we'll click on render, and this will render it out. So it will save a image of this. Here it's got portrait. I don't want a portrait for this image, I want a landscape. And then these are the sizes: small, medium, large. If I click on it, it doesn't visually have a difference, but it does have a difference to the quality or the image size. So when I did this in my practice, it was around about 16 megabytes if I'm not wrong, and then the medium was about 8 megabytes, and then the small was about 3 megabytes. As I mentioned before, this is the free version. For the deluxe version, you can also have a huge version here, and then you can also customize the image size. So if you like what you see, you can always buy the deluxe version. I'll show you how later. Now, I'm not affiliated with Photo Spiralysis by any measure, so I'm not getting any kickback, so you don't need to worry about any sales push from me. So once I've got this, I might want to reorientate this or change the position of that. So let's scroll down and let's play around with this. Now, it would have been better if you could have just click and drag this box around, but it's controlled by these sliders here. So I'm just going to capture this spiral here, this outer edge here, and then outer edge here. So I want it to be equally spaced, so something like this. And then the Y position, I just want to catch this spiral here, and then the scale is again how many you want in that. So let's do something like this, and then the rotation is similar to what we've done before. Once I'm happy with that, I will go up back to the top and then just press on render, and you'll see here that it's created a watermark here, created with Photo Spiralysis. Now once it's done rendering, you can see this blue bar here. We can save it. Let's click on this, and then let's save it using clock, and then I've got it on images, and then I'm going to press save. Now let's just go back to Photoshop to see what we've got. So let's go File, Open, click on this clock TIFF and open, and this is what you'll see here. You can see just at the bottom here, it's around about 12 megabytes, and it's got a watermark here. Now this effect, if you were to do it manually, would have taken hours. So for free software, you can create this rather fantastic Droste effect. Now let's get on to the next image. Now before we get back into Photo Spiralysis, we do need to do a little bit of tweak to our image. So our image here is of the woman here. Now you can actually do the effect with this image, but I'm going to just mask her out like this and then just put a gradient like that. So let me show you how to do it. I'm just gonna trash these layers and we'll do it together. By all means, if you want to use this particular image, there's no reason why you can't. So the first thing that you want to do is just to mask her out. Let's go to our object selection tool here and then go to select subject. If you press on this down chevron here, I've got my default as using the cloud to make that selection, and that will result, as it says here, a more detailed result. And so if I click on this select subject, it will default to this. Yours might be defaulting to device, which means that it's using your own computer to make that selection. Now it is a quicker result, but it may not be as good or as detailed as the cloud version. Now obviously you can just click on this if you want to use cloud, but if you do want to change your default, so every time that you press this select subject button, instead of having go to the down arrow and then click on this, you can change your defaults through your preferences or on a Mac on your settings. So if you want to do that, let me quickly show you how to do that. So click on Photoshop and then go to settings and then image processing. If you're on a PC, I believe your preferences are under edit, and then your preferences should be down here somewhere. So let's go back to here and then go to image processing, and then here's what you want to change. Select subject processing. I've got it on cloud. If you want to change it and then press OK. So once we're back here, let's press select subject. Photoshop's going to have a think about it, and this looks fine to me. So let's press this mask icon here, and for the time being I'm going to put a solid color behind it just to see how well the mask was created. So go back here, solid color. I'm going to choose any color, it doesn't really matter. Press OK, click drag so it's behind it, and this will quickly show me the quality of the mask here. So already I can see that this line here is not perfect, and then you've got a little bit of, let me just zoom in, you can see here, and then a little bit of the background here. Now the mask isn't perfect. I won't correct all the flaws in this. This isn't a masking tutorial. I do have separate masking tutorial. So if you want more information on how to mask, just follow those links below. For the time being, let's just do a few little tweaks here. I'm going to get my lasso tool here. I'm going to use my freeform lasso tool. Just zoom in a bit. I'm holding Z on my keyboard, click and drag to the right. And the reason why I'm using a freeform is that I can make a freeform selection here. And then because the edge to the right is going to be straight, I'm going to hold down Option or Alt on my keyboard. I'm going to let go of my mouse, and I'm going just to drag this out. Click once here, and then that will form a marquee here. I'm just going to go back to my mask here. Just make sure that's selected. I want black as my color. It doesn't really matter whether it's foreground or background. But if you're following along, you can press D on your keyboard to make it as default colors. Your default colors is black as background. So with black as background and with my mouse selected, let's press Command or Control, Delete or Backspace, and that will get rid of that. Now it's not perfect. I can keep doing it, but this is not the point of the tutorial. Now I'm going to pan up and then just go here. Now what I've done by panning up is just press spacebar and then dragged on my mouse. I'm just going to just use the freeform tool here and then just mask that out. Now I'm going to add to that selection, press shift and then just drag, make that selection, and then make sure that my mask is selected, black as my background, Command delete or backspace, and then that will get rid of that. Now if you have more imperfections on your image, by all means fix it, but for this tutorial this is good enough for me. I'm going to press Command or Control 0 to zoom out, and I'm going to replace this layer with the gradient layer just so it looks a little bit better. I'm going to press G on my keyboard, and automatically I've got what I wanted because I practiced before. But you might not have what I want, so I'm going to press this down chevron here. I went to oranges here, the orange palettes, and then just click on the first one. You don't need to follow exactly the color palette that I'm using. By all means choose whatever looks good for you. And then I'm going to just click once here. I'm going to press shift on my keyboard, and I'm just going to drag it down here, and then I'm going to click and drag it so it goes behind her, and this little diamond here adjusts the gradient. The reason why I've got this particular effect is I should have said that I've used this reflected gradient here. So I'm just going to bring it down somewhere like this, and I'm going to call that good. Now let's save this image by going to File and go to export and then quick export as JPEG. Now you probably got it as quick export as PNG. I've changed this on my computer to JPEG because I do use JPEG more often than I'd use PNG. So if you want to change the default like mine, you can go up to your settings again. Now remember, on a PC it's under edit and it's somewhere here, but on a Mac go down to settings and then go down to export, and then here's what you would select. I've got it on JPEG. Your default might be on PNG, and quality of 6 is okay. For me, if you want to bump it up, you can always bump it up, and then you can press OK. I'm going to press cancel because I don't have anything to save. So let's quickly go export and save as JPEG. I'm going to quickly do woman with picture frame and save it. So the next step is to go back into Photo Spiralysis. Again, remember what I said about Photo Spiralysis. There is no reset button. So whatever you did before, it will retain all the settings from before. Let's go back up to source to import our image. Let's go to file, open. Let's go to women with picture frame. That's the one we've just opened, and then we're going to press open. Let's mask this out. We've got our circular mask here, so what we need to do is use our polygonal mask, and the name of the game here is to mask the inside of the frame. So remember, the last setting that we used was invert, so I don't want it to invert, and I'm going just to click on these blue dots here just to adjust this image here, or this mask here. Now, one of the limitation again is that I can't zoom in, so we just have to do the best we can when we're adjusting this mask. What I suggest you do is just make this Photo Spiralysis window as big as possible, as big as your screen can handle, and then just do the best you can here. Now remember, the mask area is the area where you want your image to be replicated, and the non-mask areas is what will be repeated. Now the edge blur, will keep it at the default value, and then we'll go to the Droste effect here. You're going to come up with a awful picture like this, and again, it's because it's using the settings from the previous image. Last time I said I'll skip over this, but for this time around I won't. So to see the effects of this, let's click on grow, and that is a little bit better already. Isn't that fantastic? This clip here is basically saying that where the edge of the image stops, just don't do anything about it. So this is the blank space that you see. So where you see extends, it just fills out the area that we've masked. And what is extending is basically the edge pixels. So whatever the pixels here is just extending it all the way out to the edge of the frame, because that's what we've masked out. Repeat, you won't see that unless I change the magnification, so you can see that the repeating effect is at the edge of the picture, is just repeating the picture here. So the mirror is basically mirroring your image here. For this image, what we'll do is we'll click on extend and then just scale back our magnification, something like this. Now we might change this afterwards depending on what the overall effect is. Now remember, the rotation effect doesn't work because we've already got spiral here, but if I turn the spiral down to 0, you can see that it's not a spiral, it's just an image copied inside the frame, copied within inside the frame, and then that's when your rotation can work. But for this image, I want it spiraling, so I'm going to just click and drag so you can see that the frame doesn't seem to end. It just keeps going in and in and in. Now the vanishing point is off center, so just so we have it perfectly center, I've just clicked on this reset button here. Reverse spiral is basically just a mirror image of the spiral. The stretch is, you can see that it's just rotating the outer layers here. So I'm just going to move it back here, something like this, and maybe a little bit off-centered. And then the pole rotation, you can see that it's kind of like you're inside a ball and you're just scrolling or panning across so you can see the effect here. You can see that the image pixelates when I rotate this, so it does create some stress on your computer, but once you stop the scrubbing, it does return it back to normal. So I don't want any rotation here. I don't want any pole longitude or latitude. These funky effects, I don't need it actually. You can experiment it. It's a lot of fun to experiment with these settings. And I'll just adjust this, see what happens. Nope, I put it back to 0. I'll probably put this back to 0 again. Maybe I want a little bit of rotation. Something like this. Scale, let's just play around with it, maybe all the way to 6. You can spend hours doing this, but I'm not going to. So say we're happy with this, we can render it out. So let's click on render, and for this picture, because it's a portrait orientation, let's click on portrait and let's leave it on large, and I'm going to click on this, or not click on, scrub this, just so I can probably get this image centered, and this looks okay to me. You can play around with the scale, which is the same functionality as on the previous screen. Now what anti-alias does is basically it should increase the quality of your photo. It just makes the edges a little bit less jagged. So once I'm happy with that, I can render it. So let's click on render. This blue bar will show us when it's finished. Now I did speed that up. That probably took around about a minute or so. So depending on how much effect that you've applied to it, it does take a while to render it. So again, you can save this by clicking on this save button here and then typing in whatever name that you want and then just click on save. Now remember, there is a watermark here, so if you want to get rid of that watermark, as I mentioned, you have to buy the deluxe version. Now if you want to do that, you can click on this info button here, and then it has various other things asking you to provide feedback, etc. Now if you want to upgrade, it's this button here. You simply click on it and then it will just go through the process. Now it's around about $25 US. I'm not going to do that for this tutorial here, so I'm going to cancel that out. And that's how you create the really cool effect called the Droste effect using a little bit of Photoshop and Photo Spiralysis. So if you like what you saw or learned something new, please like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you can get notified for when my next video is out.